Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, Mark, like a job for me.
Where's the goodies?
Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Next, Mary Backstage, Noble Wife. The story of America's favorite family of the Footlights and their fight for security and happiness against the concrete heart of Broadway.
Welcome to Everything Old is New Again. This is Douglas Viviani, sans David Cohen this week, who's taking a little personal time. He'll be back very soon. But in the meantime, we're going to have a great special guest that will be co-hosting with us this week. And I wanted to see if you, the listener, was able to peg that beginning. It goes back, way back, let's put it this way, the last time you should have heard that maybe would be 84, so it's going to be quite a while ago. And, of course, before then. But let's just get on with it, because that's a little bit of Bob and Ray. We're going to talk about that and more with our co-host, David Pollock, who is experienced and has been writing and involved in television since 1968, writing with his partner Elias Davis. He's written for just a few things we'll list here: the Steve Allen Show, a Don Rickles special, Carol Burnett Show for quite a while, 3 seasons, Mary Tyler Moore Show, 4 episodes, All in the Family, MASH for quite a bit, Cheers, Frasier. And listen, there was an Emmy Award won there for Frasier, an episode we'll take a peek at a little bit too. There's also Peabody Award and 2 Humanitaris prizes. So I'll tell you, this is a privilege. We've also had Mr. David Pollock with us in 2015, if you remember show 64. You can go back on the archives, everythingoldisnewagain.biz, or on our YouTube channel, Everything Old is New Again radio show. That's everythingoldisnewagain.biz. Show 64, and here exclusively talking about Bob and Ray. We're going to open it up a little bit more today, but welcome back to Everything Old is New Again, David Pollock.
Thank you, Douglas. A pleasure.
Really had a great time with you last time, and had some fun researching and taking a look at what else you've done besides writing this great book, which is Bob and Ray Keener Than Most Persons, came out a little ways back. Since we started there, I just wanted to do with the clip there, let's take a little bit of a look, if we can, at the 2 gentlemen called Bob and Ray, which was a radio show that they hosted from many different stations for over 4 different decades. So that to itself might be a reason for writing a book. But I'll ask you, what inspired you to write a book about Bob and Ray? And by the way, from what I can tell, this is the only biography of Bob and Ray.
That's right. It's the only biography. They previously had, I think, 3 separate compilations in script form of some of their routines that had come out, and those had been published while they were still on the air, separated by a few years. This was, as you say, the only biography.
What made you take a turn to do this?
Number one, there never had been, and I had been a fan. I had been hooked. First time I heard them when I was home from school one day. And actually it was George Washington's birthday. In those days, there was no President Mondays. You had Lincoln and Washington's birthday off, and this was in 1953, and they were on NBC, and a 15-minute show in the morning for Colgate. And I it just cracked me up the first time I heard it, but I've been hooked ever since.
And I think it's so interesting that you mentioned 1953. I'm going to mention something here and read you something which is pretty interesting to me from 1973 when I was introduced to them, sort of they're just sort of the tail end and the beginning of their WOR run of 3 years in New York City.
Right.
Now I wrote them, Bob and Ray, a little bit of a fan card. I was I was 11 years old at the time. And they send me this back. It says, thanks for your recent communication and kind words regarding our hosting of WOR's Radio New York show. As you no doubt are aware by now, we are doing the program on a permanent basis and hope to remain for a long time to come. Your interest is appreciated, and we hope you continue to enjoy listening. Typewritten note, by the way, with handwriting signatures, handwritten signatures there of Bob and Ray, which I cherish to this day. And a letterhead of Goulding Elliott Gray Bar Productions, Inc. Are you familiar with? This is very obscure, but I guess you've seen that, huh?
That was their production company.
How about that? And it had like a factory on the top. They listed chairman of the board, and they listed the board of directors, all of their characters on the left side, the letterhead.
The left-hand side.
So it's very interesting. And then, so I'm telling the truth. Not that I would lie, but I mean, we've described it to a T. Now, first of all, that's interesting that there's a 20-year gap between you and I in terms of the introduction to this duo. Their comedy does go across generations. And let me just finish. I have one more letter to come full circle, and I'll let you comment, certainly. It's got to be 3 years ago, maybe 4, when it was Bob Elliott's 85th birthday in March. I sent an email birthday greeting. Things change, right? And I got back a quick note also. Many thanks for your email birthday greeting on my 85th in March. I've been truly overwhelmed by the many messages forwarded by one of his producers, Larry Josephson,
sure.
and enjoyed hearing from you and the rest of your Bob and Ray stalwarts. To write personally is an impossibility, but I do appreciate your thoughts, and my gratitude is for real, quote, as is my signature, with a signature right there. So at 85, still had a sense of humor, still responded to everything, and that also looked like it was in a typewritten, font. It looked just like a typewriter as well. So just wondering, that to me tells me a bit about them, and specifically because of the follow-up here, Bob Elliott, that still wanted to and did keep in touch with their fans. I mean, just hear them, some guy writing letters to them, and I'm getting responses.
Yeah, well, I think they were grateful, and it sounds right. And I know Bob, he would send fun-filled little notes sometimes on a copy of the book, which, my copy of the book, which he sent to me, he inscribed it, David, congratulations. Now I see what all those phone calls were about.
It's interesting to see that someone could keep that personality, that sense of humor. You could tell that, and I think when we listen to the radio, we realize that you're getting on the radio, you're getting lots of time right to the heart, and you get to know a person that way. You can't put on a facade for too long and be on the radio for 40 years and be a different personality too much than the person you're on or you are at home. So I presume that what we're saying is what you see is what you get with them, huh?
Yeah, to a point. I mean, off the air, they weren't cut-ups. They weren't jokesters. They were very matter of fact. I used to go and watch them when they were on Mutual, when I was stationed in New York in the Army. And so I did see Ray, too. In doing the book, of course, Ray had passed away by then. But, they were not compelled to be funny off the air. They were just pleasant and matter of fact, and even on the air between the bits, they weren't really cut-ups. They just sort of had a sort of spoofy byplay between each other.
Right, and there was some, I don't know where I found it. Before I got married, I was on eBay and searching all the time for different things. I found a very short clip of a video of them on the air, and then you could see them off the air, then preparing to do a commercial, or preparing in between, and you could see that it was friendly, but it was business as usual. This is something they did for a long time. This was a job, as we all know, and so it was taken serious. Comedy was taken seriously. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And you know that as well by
writing. When they did those ad-lib routines, like you just played, Mary Backstage, Noble Wife, what always amazed me was that there was no preparation. They weren't talking beforehand about, what should we do? Should we have this? It just totally spontaneous. There was no script. There were no notes. Nothing on paper.
That's the greatest. We love that. We're going to be back right here on Everything Old is New again with David Pollock and take a look at some more of TV and the many various TV shows he's gotten involved with and expand our conversation right here on Everything Old is New again. Here with John Billingsley, and we're talking about the Hollywood Food Coalition. John, what is this?
Well, I'm the president of the board. We serve a hot, nutritious 5-course meal to hungry men, women, and children 7 nights a week, 365 days a year. Been doing it for 33 years. We distribute clothing and shoes and blankets and backpacks and you name it. And we help people access a huge array of other services from partner groups. And if you'd be interested in making a donation, hofoco.org, $3 buys a hungry person a great 5-course meal. hofoco.org.
You're listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
The wind is blowing in off the air conditioner. Edit that out a little later, engineer. Blowing in off the air conditioner at a good 30 to 35 miles an hour.
Well,
I'll fix that up by the time it gets on the air.
Oh, well, you're close. Actually, it's 12 above. And the wind velocity is 38 knots.
38.
The best part is that there's absolutely no, excuse me.
Sorry, they'll cut that out.
No regulator of any kind on the machine. You can't turn it down.
Ask you to give away any trade secrets, Mr. Leopard.
Will they cut that out later?
What?
Or I cleared my throat.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, will they get that too?
Yes, that'll be gone.
Yeah. Well, there are two special reasons.
I've got one of the best engineers, and he'll see that it's fixed before it goes on the air.
Fine.
We're back. Everything Old is New again here with David Pollock talking about Bob and Ray keener than most persons. And we will be expanding into David Pollock's writing career that spans quite a bit of time and quite a number of terrific programs. But I just pulled that clip out a little bit because I'm wondering, certainly you don't know specifically, maybe you do, that sounds a little bit like there was some spontaneity going on there when they were clearing their throat and they figured they'd run with that a little bit during this Wally Ballou interview, no?
That was written by Tom Cook. If you listen real close, you can kind of you can tell what's written and what isn't.
Right.
In the ad-libbed routines, always on those continuing soap operas, they'll talk over each other, and it's not as clean, but it sounds very spontaneous. This was like many of their routines, sad stories, hard luck stories, or Squad Car 119, written by Tom Cook, who was with him for off and on for about 33 years, and he was just, as Bob said, a gold mine of material for them.
And I think, from what I understand, was he in another state? Was he in California and sent them these scripts?
Yeah, all by mail. They did meet occasionally when he would be in New York, but it would go for years, no communication. The material would arrive and heading east, and the checks would arrive heading west.
Right. It's amazing. No internet and so forth, that still had that ability to communicate and create the way they did. And
just briefly on the subject of Tom Cook,
yeah.
I guess one of the most popular bits that he did was Gathering Dust.
Right.
They did like 200 of those. And
it was just on and on of a soap opera, a parody of a soap opera, for the minutia of life. And listen, you can listen. If you're listening, you aren't familiar or you're interested, there's quite a bit of information and quite a bit of routines on YouTube that you can tune into. And you can certainly buy them. There's a website. They have a whole slew for sale. So it's well worth to take take a look. It's family fun, and it grows on you. It's very hard to do a Bob and Ray clip of a routine in 20, 30 seconds. You just don't get it all. There's so much that goes on into the punchlines and all. You gotta stick in there for 3, 4, 5 minutes, and that's what they were made to do. So
it's making fun of. It's all about poking fun at broadcasting, and it's not joke to joke. It's just premises. All the bits are in the book. There's an index of hundreds of them.
And it's well worth taking a look at this book. Bob and Ray, keener than most persons, David Pollock. Now, David, you began writing, from what I can see, are the Monkees, and then thereafter Glenn Campbell. I'm curious as to, you wrote a little bit for the Monkees, and then all of a sudden you do an episode with Glenn Campbell, and the guest stars are the Monkees. Was that a mistake, or did you specifically?
Well, that's not exactly the chronology of it all. I mean, there were years at the beginning where, when I was in college, I was writing for local radio guys. There was a comedy team here in L.A. called Paul Condilos and Bob Grant on KNX, the CBS station, and I just submitted material there, and they started using it. That was really the start of it. But when I was teamed up with Elias Davis, who I wrote with all those years, about 40 years, I guess. First show we did was, the first big network show was the Joey Bishop Late Night Show in 1967. We were there for about not quite a year, and then we left to go just briefly to the Pat Boone Show, which just lasted about 3 months before it was canceled, and Steve Allen took over. He sort of came in, and they took over the Pat Boone Show, and we were there 2 years as writers the first year, and we produced it the second year. It was a Monday through Friday, hour-and-a-half daily, just like a late-night show. Some stations carried it in the daytime. And we wrote sketches and had guests and so forth.
And then and I wanted to talk about, on the Glenn Campbell show, it seems like one of the writers also was Jack Burns, who was of Burns and Shriver, who was, prior to this, was the replacement for Don Knotts on the Andy Griffin show, which didn't necessarily work out too well for him, but his career didn't end. He moved on, and he wrote the Muppets movie after Glenn Campbell, and certainly many, many other shows as well. Was he somebody that you crossed paths with on your travels, so to speak, in that era in the late 60s?
Yes. Yeah. Well, we worked with him about 3 times, yeah.
Okay.
And you mentioned travels. We actually traveled with him on the QE2 to London when we did a show called Bonkers in 1978. Jack Burns is, you can't be in a room with Jack Burns and not be laughing. He was a very, very funny guy. And he did a summer show with Avery Schreiber called the Burns and Schreiber Summer Show back in the days when they had summer shows.
Right.
And we worked with him on, as you say, the Glenn Campbell show. And when we did the Steve Allen show, we had him on as a guest, and we did those 2-man bits that he did with Avery. We did a couple of those with he and Steve sitting next to each other as passengers on an airplane, but with Jack playing that same sort of a bigoted character that he did.
Right, and it's a shame that it didn't work out on the. It was just, how do you follow Don Knotts on Andy Griffith after 5 years of 5 Emmy Awards? So I think the expectations probably were a little high.
Yeah, I never saw those, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it didn't work for him, but that doesn't mean, like I say, he did prosper after that. It's just interesting that then there's a little connection there with Don Knotts, because when I understand you helped Don Knotts, or you wrote with Don Knotts on his television show, I think it was 1970. Is that correct?
Yeah, the 70 and 71 season. Yeah.
Right. So what was it like to you sort of in the group now here? You're in the mix with all of these comedians and established people. How was it writing for him? Yeah.
We got the job because Don had been a guest several times on the Steve Allen show, and of course, as you know, Douglas, he had really came into his own when he was a guest on Steve's old Sunday night show for several years, and then he got this show of his own, and Bill Harback and Nick Vanoff, who had produced Steve's big network Sunday night show, were producing the Don Knotts show, and 1970, as you say. So because Don had liked the sketches we had written for him when he was on Steve's show, we got that job. And Eliza and I thought, oh, this is great. This will last years because it's opposite. It's going to be opposite the Mary Tyler Moore show on CBS. And of course, she was a huge star, having been with Dick Van Dyke on the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Right.
But this was just going to be Mary alone. Dick was the funny guy on that show, so we thought we were home free. And by the first or second week, it was clear that Don Knotts just, he was the same funny guy, but he just wasn't comfortable, as the host of an hour show.
Right.
It just, for whatever reason, didn't gel. But yet we had to complete a whole season, 24 episodes of a lame duck show.
Now, did he participate in any of the writing, or how did that work with the collaboration with him?
No, we had a nice staff of writers, including two ex-Jack Benny writers, George Balzer and Sam Perrin, and some other writers, Sid Green and Dick Hills, who were big writers in England, and they had came over, and several, a lot of top writers. We wrote, obviously, tailor the material to Don, but no, he didn't sit in a room and write any of the material.
But how did he accept it? I know some people read the scripts and, I don't like this, and they send it back and they're upset. Or did he modify it? Did he run with it a little bit? What was his modus operandi?
Well, you're always under a producer. This would apply to a season we did on the Carol Burnett show. Every writer is in their room writing their own sketches, and you hand them in, and then at a rehearsal, they're rehearsed. They can always, the producer can always reject them, but Don never, or Steve Allen never, or Carol Burnett never was walking around ripping up material. Or it's all very polite, and a sketch can be rejected, but sometimes they can not work for any number of reasons. And then there's rewriting done, and cuts made, and changes made, and so forth.
And we'll follow up with all of that right after this, and Everything Old is New Again with David Pollock.
Oh, I could hide 'neath the wings of the bluebird as she sings.
These days, the news is full of teen suicide, drug and alcohol abuse, bullying, violence, and crime. It's depressing and concerning, but there is hope. Former WWE Intercontinental Champion Mark Merrow of the Champion of Choices program. Please tell us about Champion of Choices.
Champion of Choice is a live presentation that empowers students to make positive choices and live their best lives. It teaches students that they can write their own future by setting goals and pursuing their passions. Through this presentation, I teach students how to live a drug-free life, prevent bullying, avoid peer pressure, and keep negative people out of their lives. We are defined by our choices. There is hope.
To schedule a Champion of Choices presentation for your school or organization, call 407-862-4800. That's 407-862-4800. Or visit thinkpaz.org. That's thinkpaz.org.
Now, back to America's entertainment pop culture talk show. Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Hi, this is Alan Alda, and you're listening to Everything Old is New Again with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Slim, slam, alabam, blessings, Major. And Majorette?
What is this?
1,000 pardons. In my religion, this is the month of the sacred bull. I wish to invite you to my midnight prayer service in the minefields.
Is this man on our side?
Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. This is Douglas Viviani with David Pollock, writer extraordinaire of all kinds of television shows. And now we're going to talk a little bit about MASH and see if we can dive into this a little bit. We've had, as you could heard there a little bit earlier, in the clips, we had Alan Alda on our show a little ways back, and I'll tell you, he was so professional, so accommodating. He was, talking about a book, and we had a great time with him. We had so much fun. It just seemed like he was as nice, as professional as you could possibly be for someone that was such a huge star in the 70s,
Yeah, you're a good judge of character. That's just how I would describe him. Very accommodating, very nice.
How about that? And it's great to hear that. And now, at the time that you started writing on MASH, maybe you could tell us, but a lot of the earlier characters had gone. Henry Blake, Trapper John, Major Burns, even Radar, for the most part, was gone. Klinger and Father Mulcahy sort of rose through the ranks there and became a little more of players on the show at that point. And the show seemed to go a little bit more serious. If I'm right about this, and I'm pretty sure you were involved in the show in the last few years of its run. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about when you got on board with this show. What was the tone? Was it going to be serious? Was it going to be a little more comedy? Were they bringing you on for some more laughs? What was the dynamic there?
Well, you're right. It did change. I don't know that there was decisions made. I personally always felt that the shows that where Larry Gelbart was there were the funniest.
Right.
I mean, he's just a giant of a comedy writer, and his stamp on anything, by definition, makes it hilarious. And not to take anything away from the writers that were there when I was there, and they were all bright, funny, clever guys who had worked on a lot of shows. But I do think that not having Trapper and not having Radar,
right.
Radar was not there when we were there.
Right.
And there was Frank Burns,
right.
too. I always was sorry that I never got to write during the Frank Burns years. But I thought we did turn out some nice shows, nominated for Emmys and all.
Right. That clip was from episode 3 of season 10, Rumor at the Top, where rumor is that there's going to be another MASH unit, and they're going to separate the various characters, and the infighting, let's say, ensues, and it was very clever and very interesting to see the team break up and come back together, if you will, during that episode. And so I look at
Rumor at the Top. Yeah, I do remember that title.
There you go. I do remember that at the time it was a much more serious show, but there were shows that were laughs and went back to that, and I would venture to guess that would be a lion's share of some of your shows, season 9, 10, and 11, just as an aside there. But the question is, at this point in the show, Alan Alda and some of the other actors, but Alan Alda became more involved in the production and writing and even directing of some episodes. And I've seen that work. We've all seen that work. We've all seen that not work. For example, everybody listens to our show here knows I'm a Star Trek fan. And just as an aside, that Star Trek, we always do a Star Trek reference. So Star Trek Nemesis, the actors took a real role in writing about their characters in the show. But I find that when a character or a writer that's an actor on the show tries to write episodes, they're somewhat, unlike Alan Alda, I will say, but in this example, Star Trek, they're somewhat more concerned with their character and what their character is doing than the plot itself. So sometimes, do you find that's a little bit dangerous? Again, I'm excluding Alan Alda because I think he did a terrific job doing that. But do you experience that where some actors get involved and it's a different perspective? No.
Well, I think MASH is the only show I'm trying to remember where the star would write episodes, and in the 3 years that I was 3 seasons, I think he may have only written one that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I know the final MASH movie, the 2.5-hour last episode, which was movie length, he wrote, and all the writers, all the writing teams or writing entities wrote with him.
Right.
And Elias and I wrote the first half hour, and then Thad Mumford and Dan Wilcox maybe wrote the second, and somebody else the third. And so there, that we were each writing in the room with Alan. But the show from the very beginning, Gene Reynolds, who sadly just passed away last week, and Larry Gelbart, who wrote the pilot. Larry wrote the pilot, but they created the series from the beginning. Didn't want to make it another McHale's Navy kind of slam bang show. They wanted a foundation of seriousness through the whole series, and so that was always present. It may have ebbed and flowed within given episodes, but the wackiness then was just sort of layered on top of that.
Right.
So it didn't look like just fun and games with people getting killed.
Now, when you get involved with a show in season 9, obviously it had 8 previous seasons, and again, we talk about some characters had changed, and characters developed as well. Hot Lips became a little different character after Major Burns or Frank Burns left, but all that aside, is there a book, is there something that they tell you how to get the voice of these characters? Do you have to work that out yourself? How does that work when you're coming on board to a show that's already existing for so long? It would be nice if there was a book for that. If you know one, let me know. Yeah.
No, it's just assumed that it's your job to pick up those voices. And, if you see a few episodes, you can do that. I had, seen Steve Allen as a kid, so I knew his speech rhythms. I never wrote for Jackie Gleason, but I think I could, catch his rhythms.
Right.
You just,
you study the.
Pretty soon you just start hearing it.
Right. Now, do some of the actors ever, I know you talk about they don't necessarily get involved with the writers one-on-one, so to speak, but I've heard that there are times the actors say, my character wouldn't say this or wouldn't do this way. Have you had any experience with that? Or
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. There's a chain of command. When you start an episode, the cast sits around a big table, and the director of that episode is there who will read the stage directions, and the writers are there, and the producer. Burt Metcalf was the executive producer we worked under. He was a wonderful guy, and his personality just created a very comfortable, warm atmosphere for the whole staff. And the show is read just almost like it's radio, with as I say, the director reading the stage directions. And when it's done, if somebody has a line that they're just not comfortable saying, that actor would relay it to the director. The cast, the chain of command is the cast goes through the director. The director is working with the actors in the rehearsals and in the shooting of the show. And the director then, at the end of a day of rehearsing, will come into the office and tell the producer, Jamie is not too happy with such and such line, and it can either be left in, or they can say, well, maybe try it again, or we'll change it, or it can be cut out. But it's not, people aren't walking around, just announcing changes willy-nilly.
Now, speaking of voices, I don't have 1 minute left. I figure I'd answer a relatively quick question, maybe. Do you think you would have the voice or be able to write for an ongoing Bob and Ray, let's say, routine if they were presenting their genius, let's say, on the air today?
Yeah, I think I could. Well, I'm so familiar with the voices they can do.
Right.
Yeah.
They have existing characters, tons of them, and you feel you could dive right into that, which would be great fun if writing wasn't so... when you get into that room, it's a little exacerbating to actually get that idea on paper for a little bit, right? It takes a little bit of gumption to get down and do it, so it's not...
That would be easy. The real problem was, as you pointed out with MASH coming in at year 9, is thinking up new stories.
Right, which is it had to be a project and a half, but you did it successfully. We're happy you did it.
11 years about a war that only lasted 3.
Right, exactly. But you did it, and we're happy you did. We'll be back right here on Everything Old Is New Again. One more section for this show with David Pollock right after this.
Who can turn the world on with her smile?
This is Everything Old is New Again, America's entertainment pop culture talk show with Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
Let's not beat around the bush. Let's get right to the point. Tell us, Joanne.
Mary, we want Rhoda off the show.
Off the show?
I've been reading some of the notes Georgia took at the meeting, Mayor. You know the word dumb was used 5 times? No, I don't like that word, Mayor. Some people don't like the color green. I don't like the word dumb. I don't know what it is about that word that rubs me the wrong way. I just don't like it.
It must be the same reason I don't like the word bald.
Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. We are here with David Pollock, author of Bob and Ray, Keener Than Most Persons, a book that I would highly recommend just to get an idea of who they were, what they were all about, and then maybe you'll dive into learning more about them and listening on the radio of their talents. That was a little clip from Mary Tyler Moore, Season 4, Show 18 in 1974, called The Co-Producers, and our guest, David Pollock, was part of writing that episode as well. And we were talking, David, a little before about you were writing for Don Knotts for the first season. I think it was 1970. It makes sense. And at that point in time, you were saying, oh, you know what, we're up against Mary Tyler Moore, but she's not with Dick Van Dyke, so we figure we have a good shot of lasting. And then at some point in time, the Don Knotts show didn't last, and you were in some way called to join the Mary Tyler Moore show. That had to be a kick in some way.
Yeah, because we were fans of it. We weren't on the staff. We just wrote episodes freelance.
So how does that work? So right, you weren't on the staff. So you see the show existing. Your show, let's just say Don Knotts, went under and or was canceled, however you phrase it. Do you then get together with your partner and write a few episodes and send them to the producers of Mary Tyler Moore, or how does that work?
No, you wouldn't do that because you wouldn't
get paid for it unless it gets sold, right?
Yeah. But we had been around. We had been writing what was the new Dick Van Dyke show.
Right.
That was the series that he did after the original one, a series without Mary Tyler Moore, and I think Hope Lang played his wife.
Right.
And that went 3 years, but just wasn't as successful, obviously, as the first one. And we had worked with a director whose name I just can't remember, but he directed a lot of the Mary Tyler Moore shows, and on the Van Dyke show, and he had recommended us to the executive producers of the Mary Tyler Moore show, Jim Brooks and Alan Burns,
right,
who had created that series. And so we came in and wrote an episode, and it was called Operation Lou, where Lou Grant has to go in for surgery into the hospital to have a piece of shrapnel, World War II shrapnel removed. And they liked it, and so they had us do another one, and then we did another, and I think in total we did around 4 episodes.
Right. And it was well received for sure, and I just find it very interesting that at the same time, or right before then, like you say, you were on this new Dick Van Dyke show, which I believe you wrote 17 episodes with your partner Elias Davis, and that show lasted 3 seasons, not a total flop by any means, but and it was created by Carl Reiner, the same person that created the original Dick Van Dyke show. It really kind of the only difference that I could see in my research and seeing some of these shows is that they had kids, and they would, teenage daughter was a little bit more involved in that second Dick Van Dyke show, and other than that, I mean, it was the same exact creators, same everything except for Hope Lang, who wasn't bad by any means, but maybe the chemistry wasn't there. I don't know. What do you think? It's so funny. Dick Van Dyke had such success there before, and then couldn't continue that success too much. Although that show, I have to say, it was successful. 3 years is a success, but it wasn't the prior Dick Van Dyke show.
Yeah. Technically, I guess they're not considered success because it's always hoped to at least get 4 or more seasons or 100 episodes.
Right.
I mean, this is getting away from the shows and getting into production companies and studios and making money, but you want to have enough episodes so that you could syndicate it later.
Exactly. Which is the reason why you don't see that show, right? I mean...
But Hope Lang was not Mary Tyler Moore. She was, a fine actress and all. but she wasn't Mary Tyler Moore, and that affected the chemistry between the two. Also, Carl Reiner was there once a week. The show was filmed in Phoenix, and we would have to fly from L.A. to Phoenix, Arizona, every week, and Carl would come down one day a week for the reading of the script. So, you can analyze these things forever. Who knows why?
Right.
Another factor was Dick had a beard during this show, and he wasn't the same young, vibrant guy that he was on the previous series with Mary Tyler Moore. His hair was gray. He had a beard.
Right.
He was. His personality was certainly the same, but those were all factors that were just different.
Right. Exactly. And so. Let me ask you this, because it's hard to predict the success of these series, how you're going to be successful or not, as we've just seen with what we've talked about, Mary Tyler Moore and Dick Van Dyke. The question turns that your career was successful for 40 years. Is there something that you can present to us in some way, in a general way, and maybe it's never give up, I don't know, but it sounds like that in your travels. But the point is, what could you present to us as a formula, let's say, for success? I know it's a hard question, but generally, is there something that you can impart upon us?
Well, first of all, you're only alluding to successful shows. I, like everybody, whether actors or directors or performers, also have tons of flops. You're not asking me about those.
Right.
There were shows like Mr. President, Chicken Soup with Jackie Mason, Going Places with Heather Locklear, Here and Now with Malcolm and Jamal Warner, Pride and Joy, shows that are just on and off.
Right.
It's like any business, there's you just keep going. It's your job.
Right. You just can't give up. You got to keep on. You go to the next. The next.
Everybody has flops.
Right. Right. And in that era, though, in the 70s, I thought it's very interesting that you then had the ability to write for 3 women that were making their way in comedy that I think were, in some ways, you could say trailblazers with, again, Mary Tyler Moore, Valerie Harper, which you wrote for on the Mary Tyler Moore show, and Carol Burnett, which we will get into next week. But generally speaking, did you feel, I mean, you're in the writer's room and you say you're not entirely in touch with them, but, sometimes things roll downhill. Did you feel that they had any kind of pressure on them or some kind of expectation or lack, I don't know how to phrase it, in that they were women heading these shows and eventually did so beautifully and successfully, but did they have something extra on their shoulders, or was it business as usual for them?
Well, they all the women you've mentioned were big stars by the time these series were on, so there was pressure on everybody. I mean, there's pressure on them to perform and to carry off that week's show, but they all know they've done it before, so they know they could do it. No, I don't think. I'm sure Carol Burnett, by the time she had that series, she had done a series back in the late 50s with Buddy Hackett called Stanley. It was that Neil Simon wrote episodes of. She had been on the Gary Moore show for many years. So, no, I just, it was, you're grinding them out so fast on a week that there's not a lot of time to be worried about the demands, the
extra
of the thing.
Which is good to hear, because everyone looks back and they rightfully so point to these women as strong and leaders and people that did the right thing in their career and helped what's happening in the world today, so to speak. For women, but you know what? All they did, so to speak, all in quotes, they did was their job. They did it well, and they performed and got terrific results, and that's what led it. They weren't performing any kind of crusade. They were simply performing their job. That makes sense.
And they never quit, which I always tell like college classes when they ask me to talk to comedy writing classes.
Right.
There's when they start, it's failure after failure. But the one thing that they all have in common is that they never quit. They kept struggling.
Right, which is, again, an important message for all of us here on Everything Old is New Again. We will continue next week. We're going to dive into Carol Burnett's show, Don Rickles' special, Steve Allen. We'll talk a little bit more about Bob and Ray with David Pollock. The book, Bob and Ray, Keener Than Most Persons. Thank you for spending some time with us this week. We're looking forward to next week, David Pollock.
Thanks, Douglas. Pleasure.
All right, we'll see you next week. We'll be back right here on Everything Old is New Again.
Until Monday, this is Ray Goulding reminding you to write if you get work. Bob Elliott reminding you to hang by your thumb.
Hi, I'm John Billings Lind. I help run the Hollywood Food Coalition. We serve a hot, nutritious 5-course meal to hungry men, women, and children 7 nights a week, 365 days a year. We distribute clothing, shoes, blankets, backpacks, you name it. We help people access a huge array of other services from partner groups. Please join us by making a donation to the Hollywood Food Coalition through our website, hofoco.org, HOFOCO.org. $3 buys a hungry person a great 5-course meal.
You've been listening to Everything Old is New Again, America's pop culture entertainment talk show. Find us on the web at everythingoldisnewagain.biz. That's .biz.
See you next week. Same bat time, same bat station.